In 1513, a broke, exiled diplomat named Niccolò Machiavelli wrote truths so cold, so unflattering, and so dangerous to human vanity that the world spent centuries pretending he was a monster instead of admitting he was observant. His name became synonymous with manipulation, ruthlessness, and evil. But Machiavelli was not condemned because he taught people how to become corrupt. He was condemned because he described the way human beings already operate when desire, fear, status, and survival are involved. And nowhere are those forces more intense, more disguised, and more misunderstood than in the arena of attraction. What Machiavelli understood was that love is rarely as pure as people pretend, loyalty is rarely as unconditional as people promise, and affection almost always moves in the direction of perceived advantage. That truth is disturbing enough when applied to politics. It becomes unbearable when applied to women, desire, intimacy, and relationships. Because once you strip away romantic language, social performance, and comforting myths, you begin to see something harsher beneath the surface. Attraction is not loyalty, attention is not devotion, and emotional warmth does not guarantee permanence. Machiavelli never wrote a modern dating manual, but if you understand his observations about power, self-interest, instability, and appearances, you begin to see that many of the same principles govern male-female relationships. Not because women are uniquely evil, and not because men are innocent, but because attraction itself obeys laws that have very little respect for morality, fairness, or sentimentality. People say they want kindness, honesty, safety, and devotion. But what they consistently respond to is strength, value, scarcity, confidence, and emotional self-command. That is the first brutal truth. The average man enters relationships believing that if he loves deeply, gives generously, stays loyal, communicates honestly, and sacrifices enough, he will secure lasting affection. Machiavelli would have laughed at this fantasy, not because these qualities are worthless, but because he understood that human beings do not reward virtue automatically. They reward strength when virtue is backed by it. They admire generosity only when it is voluntary, not when it comes from desperation. And they value devotion only when it does not smell like dependence. This is where most men destroy themselves without knowing it. They confuse effort with attraction. They assume that because they are willing to give more, they will be loved more. But in reality, giving too much too early often lowers value rather than increasing it. The one who over-explains, over-pursues, over-commits, and over-accommodates usually does not appear noble. He appears easy, predictable, safe in the worst sense of the word. Already won. And Machiavelli understood one thing with perfect clarity. What is easily possessed is rarely deeply valued. Female attraction, like all attraction, is deeply responsive to perception, not merely to what you are, but to how you carry what you are. Women do not simply respond to a man's intentions. They respond to his presence, his composure, his options, his standards, his emotional stability, and the feeling that he belongs to himself before he belongs to anyone else. The man who is centered, scarce, and self-directed appears powerful even before he says much. The man who seeks validation, chases reassurance, and makes a woman the center of his identity appears weak even if he is kind, loyal, and sincere. This is the part polite society hides. Women often say they want emotional openness, but lose attraction when that openness turns into neediness. They say they want a man to be vulnerable, but not if that vulnerability signals fragility, dependence, or lack of direction. They say they want consistency, but become bored by men who are too available, too accommodating, and too eager to please. This is not hypocrisy in the simple sense. It is something colder. It is the conflict between what people say should attract them and what actually does. Machiavelli would have recognized this immediately. He knew that human beings are not driven by ideals and practice. They are driven by appetite, self-interest, fear, image, and advantage. They rationalize after the fact. They decorate instinct with moral language. They tell noble stories about desires that are often rooted in power, security, status, and emotional stimulation. In politics, this creates false virtue. In relationships, it creates endless confusion. Men believe words, while women often respond to emotional reality. And emotional reality is shaped less by promises than by what a man makes her feel about his strength, his worth, and his replaceability. One of Machiavelli's most famous ideas was that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Applied to attraction, this does not mean women want cruelty. It means that respect is more stable than affection. Affection fluctuates with mood, novelty, and circumstance. Respect is anchored in what cannot be casually violated. A woman may adore a man when life is easy, but if she does not deeply respect him, that affection becomes unstable the moment challenge, boredom, or a better option appears. Respect is what keeps attraction from collapsing under familiarity. Without it, love becomes sentiment without weight. And what creates respect? Not pleading, not overgiving, not endless emotional labor. Respect grows from boundaries, discipline, standards, and the quiet understanding that access to you is conditional. The man who tolerates everything teaches everyone, including the woman he loves, that he has no edge, no spine, no price. The man who will walk away from disrespect without theatrics communicates something primal and unforgettable. He values himself more than he fears loss. And that is power. Women test for this more than most men realize. Not always consciously, not always maliciously, but constantly. They test emotional stability. They test standards. They test how easily a man can be controlled by attention, sex, affection, silence, or withdrawal. They test whether his confidence is real or only present when things go his way. They test whether he can hold his shape when tension enters the room. And in these moments, a man reveals far more than he thinks. If he becomes reactive, clingy, panicked, apologetic, or desperate for reassurance, he confirms that his center of gravity is external. He lives through her approval. And once that becomes clear, the power balance changes. Machiavelli knew that whoever needs the relationship more has less power in it. This is as true in romance as in kingship. The one who fears abandonment becomes governable. The one who cannot tolerate distance becomes easy to manipulate. The one who makes another person the source of identity, confidence, and emotional peace will eventually lose all three. Women may feel sympathy for such a man, but attraction rarely survives sympathy for long. Desire does not thrive where dependency becomes obvious. It fades where there is no challenge, no uncertainty, no self-possession. This is why overavailability is so dangerous. The man who is always there, always waiting, always replying instantly, always free, always forgiving, always emotionally exposed, slowly transforms from a man into a utility. He becomes emotionally useful but romantically ordinary. He loses the tension that creates intrigue. He loses the sense that he has a world outside her. And once that happens, she no longer experiences him as a force she gets to be with. She experiences him as a certainty she can lean on without effort. Certainty may be comforting, but comfort alone is rarely erotic. The brutal truth is that attraction often feeds on selective distance. Not manipulation, not childish games, but genuine independence. A man with a mission, a schedule, standards, friendships, discipline, and a life that does not orbit female approval is far more compelling than a man who reshapes himself around every woman he desires. Scarcity creates value because it implies substance. Constant availability implies excess supply. Machiavelli understood this in courts and kingdoms. The same principle lives in dating. What is too obtainable becomes invisible. Another truth Machiavelli would recognize is that women are often more loyal to emotion than to principle. If a man consistently creates a feeling of admiration, safety, tension, excitement, and respect, he can be forgiven for many imperfections. If he creates doubt, heaviness, weakness, and emotional burden, even his virtues can begin to repel. This is what confuses men who believe relationships operate like moral scorecards. They think, I did everything right. But attraction does not reward effort in proportion to sacrifice. It responds to the experience of being with you. If that experience decays, the relationship decays, no matter how much you think you deserve credit. And yes, this applies brutally to status. Women are often more sensitive to a man's trajectory than to his intentions. They are highly attuned to his competence, confidence, influence, future, and position relative to other men. This is not always gold digging in the cartoon sense. It is deeper than that. It is attraction tied to security, social instinct, and evolutionary calculation. A man moving upward is exciting. A man collapsing, stagnating, or emotionally disintegrating becomes difficult to admire, even if he remains loving and sincere. Harsh. Yes, but Machiavelli would ask only one question. Is it true often enough to matter? And the answer is yes. This is why many women love men conditionally while speaking the language of eternity. As long as the man remains who she believed he was, strong, stable, driven, grounded, desirable, the bond feels deep and real. But if he falls too far beneath that image, the emotional contract begins to dissolve. She may not even understand it consciously. She may call it losing the spark, or needing space, or not feeling the same anymore. But beneath the softer language is a harder mechanism. Attraction changed because perception changed, and perception changed because power changed. Machiavelli warned constantly against believing appearances at face value. People present ideals, they pursue interests. Women, like men, are skilled at explaining desire in socially acceptable terms. But their choices often reveal more than their speeches. Watch what they consistently respond to, not just what they claim to value. Watch who gets forgiven, who gets pursued, who gets admired, who gets remembered. It is rarely the man who only behaves well. It is usually the man who combines emotional restraint, direction, standards, and self-respect with enough warmth to feel human. In other words, the man whose kindness is a choice, not a strategy for being chosen. This is where many men become bitter and make a fatal mistake. Once they see these patterns, they swing to the opposite extreme. They become cynical, cold, performative, and manipulative. But Machiavelli was not teaching blind cruelty. He was teaching realism. The lesson is not to hate women. The lesson is to stop approaching attraction like a moral negotiation. Stop assuming love will be given because you deserve it. Stop assuming loyalty is permanent because feelings are intense. Stop assuming honesty about your intentions will protect you from the laws of desire. It will not. The wiser response is harder. Become the kind of man whose value does not depend on female validation. Build a life that generates its own gravity. Keep your body disciplined, your emotions governed, your standards intact, and your purpose larger than romance. Care deeply if you choose to, but never from a position of need. Love without surrendering your center. Be generous without becoming available for exploitation. Be open without becoming fragile. Be present without becoming dependent. Be desirable without becoming enslaved to desire itself. Women are not repelled by goodness. They are repelled by weakness disguised as goodness. They do not lose respect because a man is kind. They lose respect because his kindness seems rooted in fear, scarcity, and the hope of being rewarded for submission. A man who can say no, who can leave, who can endure silence, who can survive loss, and who remains composed under uncertainty creates a different emotional response entirely. He does not ask to be respected. He behaves like a man who already respects himself. And women feel that immediately. That is the real brutal truth. Female nature, like human nature, does not bend itself to fairness. It bends towards strength, security, emotion, perception, and advantage. Women may speak the language of unconditional love, but most are no more unconditional than men are. They stay where attraction, admiration, and benefit remain alive. They drift where those die. The difference is that many men are taught to love idealistically, while many women are socialized to feel pragmatically while speaking romantically. That gap creates endless male confusion. So if you want to understand women, do not listen only to what flatters you. Study patterns. Study what gains respect, what preserves attraction, what destroys it, and what makes a man unforgettable versus merely useful. Understand that attention is cheap, desire is unstable, affection is circumstantial, and loyalty must be reinforced by respect. Never build your life on words alone. Never hand over your identity for the privilege of being loved. Never become so emotionally thirsty that you would rather be chosen than be whole. Machiavelli's deepest lesson was never that people are monsters. It was that they are moved by forces more selfish, unstable, and strategic than they admit. Women are no exception. They are not angels. They are not villains. They are human beings with instincts, preferences, contradictions, and survival intelligence. If you insist on viewing them through fantasy, you will suffer. If you view them through resentment, you will become poisonous. But if you view them clearly, without worship and without hatred, you begin to operate in reality. And reality is this: a woman's love can be real and still conditional. Her affection can be intense and still temporary. Her words can be sincere in the moment and still evaporate when her feelings change. That is not always deceit. Sometimes it is simply nature outrunning language. Machiavelli understood that power belongs to the one who sees this early and acts accordingly. So do not beg for permanence. Build yourself into a man whose presence is respected, whose absence is felt, and whose identity cannot be negotiated away. Do not chase female approval so hard that you become shapeless. Do not confuse emotional access with devotion. And do not mistake being wanted for being valued. Many men are wanted for comfort, attention, validation, resources, or stability long before they are ever deeply respected. In the end, the man who understands female nature does not become cruel. He becomes impossible to deceive with sentiment alone. He stops reading romance as proof of loyalty. He stops assuming attraction will survive weakness, neediness, and self-abandonment. He stops expecting women to love against their instincts simply because he behaved well. And once he stops living inside those illusions, he becomes calmer, sharper, more disciplined, and strangely more attractive than before. That is the forbidden truth hidden beneath Machiavelli's name. Not that women are heartless, not that love is fake, but that attraction obeys power more than poetry, perception more than promises, and emotional reality more than moral intention. Once you understand that, you stop asking to be loved for your potential, your sacrifice, or your purity. You become a man whose reality speaks before his words ever do. And in a world built on appearances, instincts, and shifting loyalties, that may be the only form of security that lasts.